Before you go for that membrane sweep, watch this. If you're trying to plan a true natural birth, then you need to know that membrane sweeps can sabotage your natural birth process, can undermine your confidence, and lead to unnecessary interventions, including C-sections, inductions, and even developing complications. Hi, my name is Carly Bonderud, and this is the Empowered Birth series where I go deep into everything that you need to know to plan and get your empowered, true natural birth. And if you've been following along with this particular series, then you know we are going into the 20 natural birth traps. If you want to know more, all you have to do is go to my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies for the list of free mini guides that give you all of the overviews of the traps that you want to avoid when planning a true natural birth, mistakes that you're making, and things that you don't want to put in your birth plan. Again, that's empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies. You can also go into the description of this video and grab the list directly from there, as well as an interactive PDF transcript of this entire class. Because if you are on this masterclass, then you probably know that you want to have a true natural birth, as natural as possible. But there's a difference between natural birth as what's perpetuated in the medical system and true natural birth, which is the physiological process that your body is going to do, whether or not you have anybody helping you on the outside. The fact of the matter is that most of the time, the natural birth advice out there is leading into what I call the natural birth traps. And I talk about this more inside of my book, Your Empowered Birth, which you can get on Amazon, or go into the Empowered Birth book playlist on my YouTube channel. And if you've been following along with this series, you also know that natural birth perpetuated by the medical system and our birth culture is basically like the frozen dessert version of ice cream, and true natural birth is the organic version. So you want to have an organic birth, a true natural birth, a physiological birth. But if you are having membrane sweeps, this can lead to you not getting that. Let me just be very, very clear. A membrane sweep is technically still an induction. And anything that you're doing on the outside to rush the process or otherwise get things on your own timeline or the medical system's timeline can sabotage your true natural birth. If you want to know more about that, I highly, highly suggest that you check out Rachel Reed's book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, as she goes into the nitty-gritty of physiological birth versus what our birth culture and medical system has perpetuated. Now, before I get started into telling you more about how to avoid the membrane sweep natural birth trap and when it's actually appropriate to choose a membrane sweep, because there are sometimes situations where you want to bring in that medical support. And the empowered birth method is all about aiming for a true natural birth and then pulling back only as much as needed. But in our medical-centric society, what we've basically done is made membrane sweeps seem like a routine process, which then leads to other interventions that you are trying to avoid in the first place. And this then sabotages your natural birth process and undermines your confidence, as I said. But before we get into that, let me just remind you that this is the do-it-yourself path. That means that all you have to do is watch this masterclass and you're going to get the overview of the entire empowered birth system. I'm going to tell you more about how to get extra resources to help you in your education, because you can't learn everything just from one video. And, you know, there's a lot of times where people will just say, here's the overview, and then there's a bunch of fluff and you don't get the actual information. I am not going to do that here at Empowering Moms. So I believe that information needs to be accessible and you need to be able to apply it yourself. If you cannot work with me directly, then I still want you to have an empowered birth. I'm committed to you having an empowered birth, whether you work with me or not, and whether you sign up for my self-study program or if you get my book. It doesn't matter to me because I want you to have this natural birth. When you have an empowered birth, then you are an empowered mom for life and nobody can take your power away from you again. And even if you choose to go for membrane sweeps, and as I said in this video, I will tell you more about when that is actually appropriate. you'll at least go in with all of the facts. You'll go in knowing what you need to do, and you'll know what traps to avoid. Whereas if you just go the medical route and just read the science behind membrane sweeps, this can lead to you thinking that they are not that big of a deal because you don't understand the physiological context of birth. I'm going to be bringing both the physiological context, the true natural birth, and that you don't want to have membrane sweeps if you want a natural birth as natural as possible. However, if you happen to have complications or you happen to be already going in the medical direction, then that is when we apply interventions. So I'm going to basically lay this out, telling you about how this is a trap. First, I'm going to tell you a story about how this is a trap and what I see inside the mom groups and how this undermines confidence. And then I'm going to go into how it undermines your confidence, how it also leads to you having these medical interventions you don't want, and also the overall sabotaging of your natural birth process. I'm also going to tell you how to apply the empowered birth method. I'm going to tell you some sneaky things that the medical system will do to push membrane sweeps so that you can also avoid those traps. You may have noticed that I have a very sassy t-shirt on. This has actually been designed by my partner and best friend, Jenny, who had an unassisted vaginal birth after cesarean in the hospital after previous trauma. And she and I have the same feeling that you need to basically say no to vaginal exams or cervix checks. And the reason for that is because of the membrane sweep. So I'm going to go into that. I'm also going to tell you how to apply this with the empowered birth method. So I'm not leaving anything to chance here. If you want to do the do-it-yourself path, then it is open for you. The other two paths I'm also going to tell you about, and I'll also tell you about the rule of 3. But if you continue to watch this video until the end, you're basically going to get everything that you need to know to arm yourself against the natural birth trap of the membrane sweep. And you'll also have a more of an accurate idea of whether you would even want to add that to your backup plan. Because again, aim for true natural birth and then create the backup plans. So the membrane sweep would go in the backup plan. Okay? So let me just tell you a very quick story about membrane sweeps and why I hate them. So first of all, let me just say that a lot of moms, when they get to the end of their pregnancy, and you're probably in that same boat or you're thinking about it in the future, you get to the point where you're just tired of being pregnant. And I totally get that. I really do understand the exhaustion that comes with the end of pregnancy, and you just want to get things going. It doesn't help that the medical system also tends to put you on a timeline. If you want to know more about that, go and watch one of my other videos where I talk about the natural birth trap of due dates. Because what you need to understand is that a lot of moms think they need to go for these membrane sweeps to avoid an induction. Let me be perfectly clear. A membrane sweep is still an induction, and it can lead to a lot of problems that I am going to get into. But what I see in the mom groups most often is these moms come in and they're freaking out is what's happening. They don't want to risk out of their home birth. They don't want to risk out of their birth center. They don't want to risk out of having their midwife. And this is also what happened to a friend of mine, Christine. You can again go and check out my story inside of Your Empowered Birth where I talk about Christine. I have said a little bit about it in Due Dates. And I have also basically done an interview with her where she talks about her experience. But when you're freaking out because you're going to risk out of midwife care or risk out of your chosen birthplace, this can then lead to a lot of external pressure, which then has you thinking that maybe the membrane sweep will help things along to get you into labor. Now, Christine did not want to go overdue. And so she wanted to make sure she would at least be able to have her VBAC. So she did go for membrane sweeps. But she went through a lot of membrane sweeps and still didn't go into labor until almost 42 weeks, thus proving that she was a 42-week mama. The problem is that there's a lot of care providers out there, and this is why I also say you don't want vaginal exams, is that these care providers are not always going to tell you if they're going to do a membrane sweep. That is why we have this shirt, because there are some care providers that will do this before you go into labor. There are also care providers who will do this while you are in labor if you are not far enough along. There have been stories, and I can't get into all of them, but there's so many stories back when I was a birth advocate in 2014, where I would be reading these stories of these moms who were like, I had a really painful vaginal exam. And then I found out that the care provider's fingers were bloody after, and they're like, oh, I just stripped your membranes. That should get things going now. And there was no consent given. So there are some care providers that will be like, well, while I'm up here, I'll just do this. And because of that, we were very wary about the whole idea of cervical checks, but Christine actually consented to the membrane sweep and nothing happened. I had also wanted to do a membrane sweep with my first pregnancy because, again, I was wanting to go into labor to stop doing the non-stress tests because they were stressing me out. And I felt that if I could just get to my due date and then I'd go over my due date, but they would push induction and I wanted to avoid that, I was thinking, I think I'll do a membrane sweep. The first time they did it, they weren't able to actually do the sweep itself. But unfortunately, what happened is that my cervix did not like being attempted to be checked or anything. And so the midwife's fingers were bloody afterwards, even though she hadn't actually stripped my membranes. And then this led to me having to sit in the hospital triage for 3 hours so that they could figure out whether my cramping and bleeding was because I was going into labor or because it was just the sweep that had happened or attempted sweep that had happened, and there was nothing wrong. So if you do a membrane sweep or an attempted membrane sweep, this can then basically ruin your day. The other thing is that it can cause a lot of contractions. So understanding there's moms that they don't consent to a sweep, but they consent to a vaginal exam and they get these sweeps. They're not fun. They are really painful. They can be really traumatic. They might not feel like anything. I mean, there are some moms that are like, oh, it wasn't that bad. But then there's a lot that are like, oh my gosh, this is horrible and painful. And then they also are freaking out and they're like, am I even going to be able to handle labor? So let me just be clear that a membrane sweep is not gentle. It is not pretty. And if you check the description of this video, you can go and get the transcript of this actual class. And I am going to link at this point to another video from somebody else who demonstrates membrane sweeps by basically showing you how they do it with an orange or something. It's a citrus fruit. Because what they're essentially doing is they are separating the bag of waters from the cervix in hopes that they get labor started. So how is this a trap if you're trying to plan a true natural birth? Well, first of all, it's undermining your confidence. If you don't believe that you're going to go into labor on your own and you go and you have this membrane sweep, it's automatically saying you don't know how to get your body into labor. And if the sweep doesn't work, that's going to lead to you also not having the confidence to go through with it. If you also recognize that it's horrifically painful and you've never had a natural birth before, you might also think, oh my gosh, if I can't handle this, how could I handle having a natural birth? Well, first of all, a membrane sweep is not the same thing as contractions, and it's not the same thing as your baby exiting your body. When you are having a membrane sweep, there are no endorphins happening at that moment. There's no oxytocin receptors happening at that moment. You are not in your labor trance that puts you in psychedelic labor land. Instead, you are lying there and they are shoving their fingers up into your cervix and they are moving their fingers around, and it is not a gentle process. So of course it's going to be painful. Your cervix doesn't want that. Your cervix is like, whoa, I'm sending pain receptors because something has invaded and it's not good. Red alert, red alert, red alert. But then you're also being told from the outside that you need to be able to relax. You need to be able to get through these because they're important. Otherwise, you won't go into labor on your own. And then that just reinforces that same message. We've now gotten to the point where membrane sweeps have been so ingrained into our culture that moms just assume they have to have them, that care providers just assume that that's part of it, that they do the cervix check and they do a membrane sweep as you get closer to labor because they want to get things going. They want to get you on their timeline. Now, how this adds to you having more interventions is that if you have a membrane sweep, you are risking infection every time you do one. If you have a membrane sweep, you are likely to have cramping that you may mistake for labor. And if your cervix is dilated to at least 4 centimeters and you're having contractions, even if they're irregular, the medical system will still think, oh, you're in labor, and they'll admit you, and then they'll try to get things going even more with Pitocin. The other thing about membrane sweeps is they can accidentally break your bag of waters, and they can also accidentally break your bag of waters. So understanding that your bag of waters protects your baby from infection, protects you from infection, also allows your baby to be able to move into a good position and protects your baby from the strength of contractions as they are moving down into your birth canal. So if you get rid of that bag of waters, you are going to have a more painful birth if you are basically not supposed to have that happen. My waters don't release until my babies are basically on the way out. So I know that I would much rather have a squishy water balloon on my cervix than a bowling ball. I also recognize that if it's not going to happen physiologically, then it's not supposed to happen. But if you mess with the physiological process, that is when things go wrong. So understanding that you're irritating your cervix, first of all, you're introducing infection, you are messing with the membranes. Even if the waters don't release, they could be so weakened that you go and you have your waters break before they were actually intended to. And again, this can lead to a longer labor process than if you had left things alone. So again, if you are planning to have a true natural birth, you want to avoid medical intervention, right? So if you have a membrane sweep, that is a gateway to more medical intervention. And finally, how this sabotages your natural birth process is that with all of these ideas that you have the membrane sweep, am I in labor yet? And then you keep watching the clock, seeing if you're in labor. You're going to have a bad time. You're going to have cramping. You're going to have bleeding. You're going to be wondering, is this it? Is this it? And then you might get really frustrated and feel discouraged if you don't go into labor within 3 days of the membrane sweep. But at the same time, if you are messing with that physiological process, and not only that, but listening to the outside world that tells you that membrane sweeps aren't a big deal, that you should go for one, that it will help the process along, and you're in this membrane sweep culture of fear, then this can then lead to you having your confidence basically shot, and you're thinking, oh, I just have to keep going for these membrane sweeps, or I'm going to have an induction, and you don't recognize that actually you don't. You don't have to do that. So the next thing you need to understand is how to avoid this process. Well, first of all, if you're having a true natural birth, you just don't have any vaginal exams. And you recognize that membrane sweeps have a whole bunch of things that come with it that you don't want. And you basically reinforce your mindset to be like, this is my backup plan. And until the hard lines in the sand are approaching, I'm not going to have this membrane sweep. Now, there are times when the membrane sweep is helpful. And that is if you are already kind of looking at your plan and you're seeing that some hard lines in the sand are coming up and you have some pink flags that are coming up in your pregnancy and you're like, I may need to induce for medical reasons. If you are already looking at a medical induction and you would like to try to avoid that situation or at least move things along, then having a vaginal exam and recognizing your Bishop score is step one. And a membrane sweep can also help things along because maybe, just maybe, that will be enough to put you into labor. Maybe your body is already prepared and ready to go, and that membrane sweep will get things going so that you can beat that induction date. But again, this is only if you are planning to go with your backup plans. If you're not planning to go with your backup plans, stay away from membrane sweeps. I cannot stress this enough. It is such a natural birth trap. And so many moms, they get these sweeps and then their birth plans get completely derailed from them. So I don't want that to happen to you. So again, the empowered birth method, we aim for a true natural birth and we pull back only as much as needed. And before I get into the actual application of the empowered birth method, I'm just going to give you some additional resources that you may like to check out on membrane sweeps. Number one, as I said, is Rachel Reed's book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. This will give you the overview of how true natural birth actually works. So then you'll understand more about how intervention messes with that process. And then you can kind of see, oh, that's why that happens. And you're going to also recognize when that's actually appropriate and when it's not. This book is probably the one that I would recommend to every mom who wants to have a true natural birth and to every birth worker who wants to support a mom in having a true natural birth. So even if you're watching this as somebody who wants to support moms, maybe you're a mom yourself and you also would like to be a doula. Hey, I'm not going to judge if you came in here and you're not looking for actual birth education, but you're doing this because you just have a passion for birth. You're just as welcome here as the mom who is looking to avoid membrane sweeps. And if you would like to work with me further, you can always reach out to me, hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com, because I do support those who want to help with the empowered birth movement. And I will talk about that more within this masterclass series. So again, you want Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage for the overview of true natural birth. Now, if you are planning to get an induction, then Rachel Reed's other book, Why Induction Matters, is incredibly helpful at understanding physiological birth versus the induction process. She also has an entire section on membrane sweeps, so then you can decide whether or not that is right for you. And Hensi Goer's book, The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth, also has a section on membrane sweeps. Now, I'm also going to add that as of recording this video, Hensi Goer has another book coming out in the Take Charge of Birth series called Labor Induction, Why, When, and How. And in that one, there's also some information on the physiological birth process versus the whole idea of labor induction and when to decide to do that. Because again, if you're going for a membrane sweep, it's most likely that you're trying to get labor started. And if that is the case, then you have to know that this is not a foolproof way to go into labor. The baby actually decides when they're ready to be born. And if you mess with that process, you are no longer having a physiological birth. Now, let me also tell you that there are some articles that you'll want to check out as well. There's Dr. Sarah Wickham's article on membrane sweeps, and there's Rebecca Decker's article on evidence-based-birth.com. And again, all you have to do is go into the description of this video, go and get the interactive PDF transcript of this class, and you're going to get the embedded links in there. I'm also going to add that these transcripts do get updated. So if you notice that there's not a lot in there at the start and it's just the transcript, or there's just some highlights to it and there's just a few links, these do get updated. And I usually inform my Empowered Birth community members through the Empowered Birth newsletter. All you have to do is sign up. you can either go and get the Empowered Birth Toolkit, which allows you to get the most updated transcripts, or I add extra PDF resources, I add reports, I add workbooks, I sometimes add extra bonuses just for those who are on the newsletter, because basically this toolkit is a Google Drive. So understanding the toolkit is itself a Google Drive that you get information and access to more resources. You also get a weekly deep dive newsletter where I tell you about the Empowered Birth magic and the Empowered Birth method, the overall ideas of what's coming to me in that given week. I tell you about things that I've already created. I put you on your path to find whatever else you're looking for. I tell you about my Empowered Birth Circle and what they have on offer. And I basically help you to become the most empowered mom that you can possibly be. Because when you have an empowered birth, you're an empowered mom for life, and no one can take your power away from you again. And my newsletter is not just for moms who want to just have a natural birth. If you want to just have a natural birth, then you're fine with just doing the do-it-yourself path. If, however, you also want to go beyond birth and find the magic that comes with empowered birth, then being on the newsletter allows you to get access to that too. Because birth is really the first step. And once you have an empowered birth, you can go anywhere with that because you've done the hardest thing that you could possibly think to do, and you've tapped into your intuition and your power. But you're not going to do that if you end up having a whole bunch of interventions and the medical system takes over your birth, or society tells you that you can't do it and scares you. And that's why I'm going to tell you additional resources that you can get with the Empowered Birth method. First of all, as I said, these are the deep dive masterclasses, and you just want to be taking notes. You just want to be basically getting that information. But then in addition to that, you want to go beyond. You want to go beyond just this video. I do highly encourage you to go into the transcript and get the extra links so that you can go on your treasure hunt and find more information, because the do-it-yourself path can be really empowering for moms who want to have a true natural birth experience and they want to do it themselves. Maybe you've been burned in the past by people who guided you and you want to just trust your own intuition. Or maybe you're just somebody who loves information and you love going down those rabbit holes and you just want to get everything. And if that's the case, then absolutely go down the rabbit holes and find your own wonderland of information. Because I did the same thing. I am sort of a do-it-yourselfer. I also appreciate premium coaching, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And I am also a STAR student. So I can do all of those things. And I also recognize that sometimes it can be really rewarding to be able to just go through a library of information and pick and choose what you want. So I'm not going to keep that from you. I'm not going to say that you have to go through a course in order to get the information, or you have to go through my coaching to get the information. No, information is free, and I only charge for access to me. So as part of the do-it-yourself path, though, I'm just going to ask that if you find value in these videos and masterclasses, then please like, share, subscribe to this channel, and pay it forward. Pass this on to other moms, and do your best to engage with the content so that we can boost the algorithm. Because a drop in the ocean creates ripples, many ripples create waves, and enough waves can change the tide. And here at Empowering Moms, I am committed to every mom having an empowered birth, whether they can work with me or not. And I also want to be able to take the proceeds from Empowering Moms and put it back into things that are actually going to help moms have more options in their birth, such as birth houses and birth centers that are not run by organizations that risk moms out and force them to have these membrane sweeps in order to keep their midwife, so that they can have doulas and they can have people who can support them in the kind of birth they really want without having their hands tied within the system. Because yes, sometimes there are organizations that appoint doulas within the medical system for moms. Let me be clear about this. If you allow somebody outside of yourself to choose who you get to hire, then that may not be aligned. And I want to add more choices and more options to moms who really need it. Outside of the birth space, there's some moms that they have their babies and they recognize that everything else that was tolerable in the past is no longer working for them. So these moms may not want to go back to work. They may want to work for themselves. And there's so many people out there that will say work from home, and then the moms go in and they get scammed. Or, there's so many people out there that take advantage of moms that have nowhere else to go when they're trying to leave an abusive partner. And I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So again, part of empowering moms outside of the birth space is really making sure that moms are empowered for life. Because when you're an empowered mom for life, no one can take your power away from you again. And that allows you to have a more conscious relationship with yourself, with your kids, and with your partner. So in addition to the resources I mentioned, getting Hensi Goer's book or Rachel Reed's book, and basically understanding how membrane sweeps work and what to avoid with that, I also want to let you know that the empowered birth method requires you to do a couple of things. First of all, as I said, we are aiming for a true natural birth and we're pulling back only as much as needed. This requires you to first unlearn everything that you were ever taught about birth. And the Reset Your Mindset for Empowered Birth Challenge is really the first step to that. All you have to do is go into the YouTube playlist and go through that challenge. And that is basically your introduction to what self-study looks like. It's completely free. If you prefer to binge watch tiny little short videos instead of the longer deep dive, if that's something you'd like, it's on my Instagram as well. So you can go into the gallery and you can find the Reset Your Mindset for Empowered Birth Challenge in there. If you are stuck, if it looks like it's been a couple of years when this video was recorded and you can't find that challenge, you can reach out to the team, hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com, and we will redirect you to help you to get that information, because it is incredibly important that you go through that Reset Your Mindset for Empowered Birth Challenge as the first step. The reason for that is because you cannot get new information if you still have underlying old fears and limitations, such as the idea that if you don't have this membrane sweep, you're going to lose your midwife and you'll have to have an induction, and you don't want that. And fear, 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 fear. The Reset Your Mindset for Empowered Birth Challenge shows you that actually you have a lot more power than you think you do, and to get rid of all of those old stories in your head so that the new information can come in. The next step of the empowered birth method, applying the idea of avoiding these membrane sweeps, is using the 5-pillar system, which again, you can learn more about inside my book, Your Empowered Birth. It is available on Amazon if you want to support the empowered birth movement, or what you can do if you're not quite ready to commit or you don't have the money to invest right now. I mean, sometimes even if it's only like $20 or so, like a book, you might need to buy milk. You might need to buy groceries. And I completely understand that. And that is why information is free. And I only charge for access to me, because I would much rather you be able to invest in yourself, in your health, in a doula, in the things that you need to be able to have your empowered birth. So yeah, my book is available on Amazon, and I would absolutely love you to get a copy of your own and to be able to have it in your possession and to hold on to it and to even lend it out to people. But if you can't do that, it's on YouTube. It's inside the playlist. All you have to do is go into the book playlist and you can listen to it. And I actually read out the entire book to you. You need to have the 5 pillars. That is the basis of the book. You need to have the right mindset, the right education, the right environment, the right facilitators, and the right support. How this applies in terms of membrane sweeps is you need to have that right mindset of why are you doing this in the first place? What is your visualized outcome of what it's supposed to do for you? And are there any underlying fears that are pushing you in this direction that actually you don't want that membrane sweep, but you're choosing the lesser of 2 evils because you think you have no choice. Because there's a lot of times where moms think they need to go for a membrane sweep and they're asking for information on membrane sweeps, but really they don't want it. They just think they have to have it. So the right mindset allows you to recognize you do have a choice. You are your own best expert. You are the decision maker. The second part, of course, is the education, the right education. As I said, inside of the description of this video, you also have access to the transcript, and there are additional resources that give you that right education. It does the breakdown of the numbers, Rebecca Decker's article on membrane sweeps, Rachel Reed's articles on membrane sweeps, Pensy Goer's stuff on membrane sweeps, understanding that if you have that information, then it's like, okay, this is the risks, this is the benefits, this is the alternatives, this is the overview of what could happen if I choose to do this intervention. But again, as I said, if you do this, it is an intervention. Let me just be clear about this. It is an intervention. It's not something that would happen in a wild pregnancy. It's something that happens when you're trying to control birth. And if you do need to control birth, you need to have that right education to know that this is actually appropriate for you. The right environment is also important, not just in your overall environment of feeling that you're safe enough to go into labor on your own and you're safe enough to make the decision to either have a sweep or not, but also when you're in the mom groups looking for information. You need to also have protected your mindset and feel safe in that mom group. And that mom group needs to have moms that are not going to shame you, blame you, make you wrong. And it needs to have people that actually know about the fact that you don't have to have a membrane sweep. They know the risks and benefits. They happen to give you articles and resources without just saying, oh, it's not so bad, you'll be fine, and doing the usual thing that the mom groups do. Finally, you need to have the right facilitators, because if you have a care provider that's very cervical check happy and wants to do a cervix check at every appointment, and you keep saying no to that, and they keep pushing you, they are putting a lot of stress onto you that is then affecting your physiology of being able to go into labor. Your body cannot tell a difference between a tiger chasing you or stalking you versus the care provider that keeps trying to push membrane sweeps and pushing cervix checks on you. So you need to make sure at the beginning of your pregnancy, ideally, that you have chosen a care provider who can sit on their hands. And go check out some of my other videos on how to hire your care provider if you want to know more about that. Or you can go and get my course, Your Empowered Birth Workshop, because that has a little bit more on how to choose your care provider and a little bit about how to advocate for yourself. But Your Empowered Birth Academy's core program has even more of that. Now, this is a much denser program than the self-study of Your Empowered Birth Workshop. I typically don't give that out as like a free-for-all. So you can get access to that course as a self-study, but in order to do that, you need to basically qualify. You need to have already gone through a lot of the basic trainings of Empowered Birth Method. And then I basically assess, are you ready? Could you do this on your own? Or would you need to have somebody walk you through it? And if that's the case, then I would basically counsel you on that. I'd be like, hey, you don't seem to be at the level where Academy is going to be okay for you. You need to do this piece first and then do that work and then show me, and then we can go from there. So that leads into Your Empowered Birth Workshop, because the fact is that after you've got that right facilitator, you need the right support. Your partner needs to be on board. And again, there's a little bit about this inside of Your Empowered Birth Workshop, and there's more inside of Your Empowered Birth Academy. These are basically the core pieces that I help a lot of my clients with. So I help them work through their fears and limiting beliefs, and the ideal birth vision is what we ultimately create with the backup plans. Then I also help them to get their partner on board, because if you don't have your partner on board and they think that you need to go into labor by a certain point, or they're even just sitting there and they notice that you're trying to do this membrane sweep and you're uncomfortable, and they know that you don't really want it, but they don't say anything, or they try to be like, you're doing good, babe, it's okay, but really you're not okay. They're basically enabling this trauma to happen without realizing it, and that can cause a disconnect within the relationship itself. So understanding that you need to have that right support. Also, your friends and family, if they are also in the pro membrane sweep category, they can start putting pressure on you as well. And they may not be able to support you in refusing a membrane sweep. So understanding that, we then go into part of the empowered birth method, if you are still going the do-it-yourself self-study path, which is the empowered birth workshop. I call it your empowered birth workshop. And this basically goes into a full-blown course. It's about 6 hours long if you watch the videos one after the other. There is a workbook that you go through at the same time. And ultimately, at the end, you have your empowered mindset of your empowered birth. You have utilized the 5 pillars, and then you are more likely to be able to advocate for yourself strongly and say no to those membrane sweeps. So again, as I said, this leads into the 3 paths to empowered birth. So you can theoretically watch all of these videos and get all of the overview. Take notes. As I said, it's important to take notes. And even if you're not planning to go any further with the empowered birth method itself right now, if you're just kind of looking at, do I want to avoid this membrane sweep? I'm just going to remind you that you can't get everything from just one video. So if you are doing the do-it-yourself path, you're going to also want to check out some of my other videos on the flow of natural birth versus medical birth. You're going to want to look at how to confidently say no to your care provider. These videos are inside of another deep dive masterclass series called the 26 Things That You Need to Know If This is Your First Time Planning a True Natural Birth. I highly suggest you go and check those out. Go and check out the additional resources that I mentioned that are going to be embedded inside of the transcript. So just check the description of this video. And if you are going to do the do-it-yourself path, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Pay it forward, pass this on to other moms. The other part is that if you're going to do that, you're going to want to do the rule of 3. This means you watch the video once, you know the overview, and then you go back and watch it a second time, and you're going to get some aha moments that you didn't see before. Because now that you have the baseline training, you're going to be like, oh, now I see even more to uncover. And then the third time you watch it is when you really get it, and then you can implement. And then if you do that, then what you can also choose is, are you going to go for those next steps? Are you going to apply the empowered birth method? And how do you want to do that? And that is where self-study comes in. This is, again, a completely free path. All you have to do is put your name and email, and then you get directed to your empowered birth workshop. Your empowered birth workshop is basically the signature introductory program that helps you with the empowered birth method. I teach you about how to get past your fear. I teach you about physiological birth. There's a module on how to avoid the induction traps, including membrane sweeps. There is then a module on creating your ideal birth plan. And then we also finish off with a little bit of birth advocacy and getting your partner on board. So it's all 5 pillars. It's all in order. And when you've done that, then you're basically ready to move on to something deeper or keep going with the self-study, because I'm going to keep creating self-study courses. I am committed to you having an empowered birth, whether you work with me directly or not. And I want to make sure that that information is accessible to you. And I want to make sure that it's also in a way that you can basically build on it. The other part about self-study is that I intentionally put the courses in a certain order so that your mindset is continuously getting strengthened as you go through that course. And you are unlearning a lot of old fears and misconceptions as you are going through that course. So by the time you're at the end of it, you are an empowered mom and you know where to go next. The other part is that maybe you prefer to have somebody walk you through it. And that is the first access point where you need to pay. And it's called Self-Study VIP, where basically what you do is you're paying for the extra support. You go in, you buy the course, you still have all of the same core material, but you have that extra support. You can email the team and we will give you more information as you need it for anything that you're going through within the course. You can show us your homework, you can show us what's in the workbook, and you can be like, I'm stuck here. And we can be like, oh yeah, you need this resource, here you go, and give it to you. So you don't have to go searching for it. Instead, we're like, oh, this piece right here, yeah. Oh, that's easy. Okay, here you go. You also get access to a laser coaching call with either myself or one of my team members, where we then basically go through your whole workbook once it's completed and be like, okay, here's the fine-tuned piece that you need. And then we basically coach you on that. And it's very quick. It's about 15 minutes of our time. And we go through and we actually help you because, again, we're committed to you having an empowered birth. Myself and my coaching queens are here to ensure that you are an empowered mom for life and nobody takes your power from you. Now, aside from that, maybe you like something even more customized. And this is where it's a little bit more of a barrier. We don't take on everyone who comes to us in this third path. It's called premium coaching, and we have group programs that we sometimes run. They're very intimate. We have maybe about 3 to 5 people in our deeper mistress minds, as I call them. Or if we have larger classes, there are about 20 students. We also have workshops that we sometimes run, like one-day workshops, or sometimes there's like something else that we're basically putting together, but it's not all the time. Let me be clear on that. It's not all the time. It's based on my energy, the energy of my coaching queens, and what we can really bring out at that moment. But aside from that, we also have high-level premium coaching. That is when you get to work one-to-one with me. That is where a lot of the transformation happened for my clients, Lisa, Rebecca, Jenny, and several others that came to me in that space where I was helping them through their empowered birth journeys. Sometimes I even attended their births or I was available on call for labor. And that is a high premium price tag. And the reason for that is because I can save clients about $30,000 or more in the birth trauma counseling that they are now not having to do, and in the medical bills that they no longer have, or the overall cost of recovery. Like there's so many costs involved when you have a traumatic birth that many people don't account for. And the medical system doesn't see it because they're just trying to avoid litigation. So the thing that you have to really understand, and this is a birth advocacy secret before I get into the recap, is that when the medical system is offering membrane sweeps, it's one of two things. One, the care provider just wants you to go into labor on their timeline. They don't actually care about your birth experience. They're category 5 and they're trying to control everything. And sometimes it's also because you seem to know a lot about natural birth and they want to teach you a lesson. In fact, this has happened to several moms that I've talked to in the mom groups and clients that I've had where they're like, I feel like this care provider just wanted to show me how painful they could make it just because I kept saying I didn't want the epidural and they were pissed off at me. And I'm like, based on what you've told me about this care provider, they are category 5. And yes, that is exactly why I say that you need to be careful and be able to spot these category 5s. Now, if you go and get your Empowered Birth Toolkit, or you go and get your Empowered Birth Workshop, there is a birth advocacy report that will help you identify a category 5 care provider. And I tell you how to avoid that and what to do if they are the only care provider that is available, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes that person is terrible, but there's nowhere else to go. So what do you do? Well, there's still ways around that. And I used a lot of the same things in getting out of a toxic situation with my former partner. And it's also what I help a lot of moms do in their birth experiences with care providers that are Category 5. Again, you just go onto my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/start guide. That gives you an overview of everything, or you can just check the description of this video, and there is a link within the transcript itself. Okay? So understanding that, first of all, there's that care provider that really just wants to teach you a lesson or get your birth moving on their timeline. The other one is the one that's trying to do damage control, like midwives, for example, who happen to be in a system where they know that there is a cutoff for when you're allowed to stay with them. And they know what is waiting for you out there, and they don't want that. They want you to go into labor so that you don't end up in that system. You don't end up with that OB that they have to refer you to if you risk out of that care. Or they don't want you to have to leave your birth center. They want you to stay because they know that the hospital is not the right place for you. Or they know that you're going to risk out of your home birth because you're just going overdue, and they want you to be able to stay home. They know that you want to have a natural birth, but the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking on your natural birth, and they're trying to suggest a membrane sweep because they know that maybe that might be enough to get you into labor so that you don't risk out. This is, again, basically allowing your midwife to still be within the confines of what they have to offer, but also to kind of circumvent it. But, this is also what moms do. They're like, I'll get a membrane sweep, and then that avoids my induction. But really, you're playing the game. You're still playing that game that is rigged against you. And the empowered birth method is all about getting the birth you want without having to fight, beg, or compromise. That's why it's a tagline on my book. Because if you are agreeing to that membrane sweep just to avoid that induction, or just to stay with your midwife, or just to have your chosen birth location, that's not exactly what you want, is it? No, you're compromising. And it can lead to things that you really don't want to experience later on. So instead of that, the empowered birth method is all about aiming for a true natural birth, pulling back only as much as needed, and flipping the script so that you are your own best expert. You are the birth visionary. You are now fearless. The medical system and our birth culture cannot perpetuate that fear and push that onto you. Again, go check out the Reset Your Mindset for Empowered Birth mini challenge if you want to know the overview of getting past your fear. And definitely go and get your Empowered Birth workshop, because that has a whole module where you can work through trauma and get past fear. And then we also go into the physiological birth and avoiding those induction traps. So when you understand this, that you need to play the game differently than what you've been taught, then you are basically an empowered mom for life. Nobody can take your power from you again. Nobody can scare you out of it. Nobody can talk you into things that you don't need. And you don't need a membrane sweep if you are planning a true natural birth. It's unnecessary. So now that you understand the empowered birth method and everything that I was talking about how this undermines your confidence, let's just quickly recap, okay? So the reason you don't want membrane sweeps is because it undermines your confidence and can also lead to unnecessary interventions in the future. You're going to have stop and start contractions. You may have bleeding. You may have more cramping. You may think that you're going into labor when you're really not. The other thing is that it could irritate your cervix and cause your labor that was going to start anyway to be more painful. It can weaken the bag of membranes, which means that you could end up having a pre-labor rupture of membranes, or your membranes rupture during your labor, your waters release before they were actually intended to. Baby gets stuck, or baby just gets into a bad position, and you have back labor on top of that, that could have been avoided if your membranes had still been intact. You are also now getting a bowling ball on your cervix, not a squishy water balloon. So there's a whole bunch of issues that can come from the membranes being weakened. But additionally, You can also end up having infections. You can end up having them accidentally break your bag of waters. And not only that, but they hurt. Membrane sweeps are not fun. They're not a gentle process. So understanding that you don't need to have them, it undermines your confidence, it leads to medical intervention, and the way to avoid them is avoid cervix checks. Avoid them. You don't need them. The final thing, of course, is that if you do choose to have a membrane sweep for your backup plan, you need to understand that this is an induction. This is going to speed up the process if you are going to go into labor, or it could do nothing at all because your baby's not ready. You also need to recognize that if you're planning that, it's more likely that you would want to do that if you were already going to go the medical route and you were looking at having an induction. But if you're not looking at having an induction, then don't do membrane sweeps, okay? Because again, that messes with your physiological process. And if you want to know the additional resources, again, go into the description of this video, into the transcript, and get those links, okay? Because the deeper you go with empowering moms, the more treasures you're going to uncover. And this is the do-it-yourself path. So thank you so much for watching. And if you found value in this, please like, share, subscribe to this channel, pay it forward, pass this on, because a drop in the ocean creates ripples. Many ripples create waves, and enough waves can change the tide. So thank you again for watching. Have a happy, empowered birth journey, whether that is birthing a baby, birthing a creative project or your business, or birthing a new version of yourself. Empowering Moms is here for you. And next week, we are going to be talking about natural birth trap number 5, which is the medical pressure and societal pressure on the outside trying to get you into labor. So stay tuned, keep following this channel, and I will see you next week. Namaste.